Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to the concluding session in our multi-week series, The Case for Open Borders. When we put this thing together, I wanted to bring the best exponents of open borders in the country together and make a collection of the best video presentations in this area so that not only for the benefit of those of you who have participated and attended this, for which we're very grateful, but to serve as a repository for when Americans finally come to the realization that their immigration control system that has been in existence for decades, all my life, has never worked, still doesn't work, and will never work. And that, in fact, serves as one of the great destroyers of our freedom. And so we pull those together. They're on our website at fff.org in the multimedia section. But we decided to add on a concluding session with Richard May. Y'all are acquainted with Richard, professor of economics at the Citadel, former president of the Foundation for Economic Education, former Ludwig von Mises professor of economics at the Citadel, and
At Hillsdale College.
Hillsdale College, and has been my friend for 40 something years, since the 1980s when we first met in Dallas together. And we've been on the same page on this issue of open borders, free trade, and open immigration. In fact, when I first started FFF, Richard was vice president of academic affairs, and one of the first books we came out with was The Case for Free Trade and Open Immigration. In other words, open borders on the free movements of goods, services, and people across borders. And just as a refresher, what we mean by open borders is not more immigrants, not letting in more immigrants, but the same system we have domestically. That is where people are free to cross state borders without any government guard stations, border patrol, walls, monitoring, checkpoints. Nobody worries about a trade deficit between the states. That's what we mean when we talk about open borders. It's the total unrestricted movements of people across borders. Okay, so Richard made the first presentation in this series. I made the second presentation, but we wanted to add on here a segment that addresses the common objections to open borders, because we've heard them all the time, especially from the right wing, that there's this objection and that objection and this objection. And so we thought, okay, let's just conclude this series with a segment that addresses and that focuses in on those common objections. So Richard, let's get started with what I consider is the big one, or it certainly ranks in the top three. And that is, Jacob, we can't have open borders as long as we have a welfare state, because the whole world will come again on welfare. And they quote Milton Friedman, libertarian economist, Nobel Prize winner, saying, well, we just can't have open borders as long as we have a welfare state. Well, Friedman was wrong. Of course you can have open borders with a welfare state. You can have the welfare state here, and you can have open borders. In other words, the free movements of goods and services and people across borders. What Friedman is really saying, and what the right-wing proponents of immigration controls are saying, is that if you have open borders with a welfare state, there is a possibility that taxes will go up, because there will be people flooding into the country, going on welfare, and therefore causing expenses, government expenses, to increase, which means higher taxes. So what they're really saying is not that you can't have it. They're saying is, we don't want to pay the higher taxes that are possible, that might happen under this system. And therefore, to avoid the payment of higher taxes, we have to join up with the statists temporarily, as long as the welfare state's in existence, which could be forever. Well, just have to join up with the statists, Jacob, on this particular issue of massive immigration controls and a massive police state, an immigration police state. In other words, the destruction of freedom that comes with a police state, so long as you have a welfare state. Well, I'll go first, Richard, with my response to this, and I'll turn it over to you. But My position is that as libertarians, our goal is a free society. And that is to make that case for the free society across the board, we have to adhere to our principles all across the board. That if we let the statists manipulate us, maneuver us with their little statist schemes into joining them in abandoning our principles and joining up with them, they win. Our movement is a dead cause as far as I'm concerned because they will laugh. They will say, "Hey, welcome to the world of statism. It's good to have you guys as partners and allies. You've joined up with us on at least this issue, which is a major issue, obviously immigration. But you're now one of us. Welcome to the world of statism." How can you ever have any respect for a movement where people are going to abandon their principles simply because it's pinching them in the pocketbook? I mean, if it means the payment of higher taxes, so be it. We need to adhere to our principles if we're going to ever achieve freedom. An example of this is the drug war. If as a libertarian, we all oppose the drug war. I think that's one of the litmus tests for a free society, for being a libertarian. That the state has no moral authority to punish you for ingesting the wrong substance. But I think we'd all agree that if you legalize drugs, which is what we advocate, there's a good possibility that some drug addicts are going to go on Medicaid to seek treatment, because addictions will now be out in the open. And so that could result in the payment of higher taxes. And so I guess we just have to support the drug war as long as Medicaid is in existence. So now we're joining the status not only on immigration controls, but supporting the drug war too. Well, the statists love it. I mean, hey, welcome to our world of statism. They love it when they have libertarians joining them in their wrongdoing. I say absolutely not. You just maintain adherence to principle. You keep advocating drug legalization and wherever the chips may fall. Now, having said that, this notion that the open borders with a welfare state will cause higher taxes, I think is a canard. In fact, sometimes I think it's an excuse for people to say, well, I would favor open borders except for the welfare state. My hunch is that even with no welfare state, a lot of those people would say, I still don't want open borders, but they use the welfare state argument. Well, there's lots of studies and reports. I don't get into all this because for me, all of this is a freedom issue. But there are studies and reports that show that the prosperity that the non-welfare recipient sector of immigrants produces far outweighs the any additional tax burden from the small minority that are coming to get on welfare. Now, we all know that the welfare state-minded person is a different kind of person. He likes his life safe and secure. He's on the dole. The dole weakens people. It weakens the moral fiber of people. People that are willing to leave their country, their language, their culture, their family, their friends, language to come to a country where you're going to get abused and insulted, it's not your standard welfare recipient. They don't have the intestinal fortitude for that. And so the people you end up attracting are the non-welfare recipients, the entrepreneurs, the hard workers, the people that want to make money. They want to get rich. And everybody knows you don't get rich on welfare. And so the possibility that a large number of welfare-driven people are going to pick up stakes and come to a country, ridiculous. It's just not going to happen. I grew up on the border. I spent almost half my life on the border. I've dealt with illegal immigrants and other immigrants all my life, and I've never met one single one that said I came to America to get on welfare. But what we need to do as libertarians is just focus our efforts on ending welfare. I mean, it's my understanding that even as a foreigner, they have to wait 3 years to get on welfare. But that's where our focus can be is, okay, if you don't first of all, dismantle a whole welfare state for everybody. It's an immoral system. But rather than advocate this huge immigration police state that punishes all the immigrants that are not coming on welfare, prohibits them from coming in freely, just focus your energies on getting Congress to say, okay, no welfare for immigrants. I think the fair thing would be to also don't make them pay taxes that fund the welfare state, but that's something else. Now, there's the other thing of public schools and emergency rooms, but I remember what Sheldon Richmond once said. It was so astute. He says, notice that the only sector that complains about too many customers is the public sector. It's always a burden. The public schools, oh, more people, oh, what a burden. The welfare system, oh my gosh, what a burden. Oh, the state hospitals, the emergency rooms, oh, what a burden. But if you go to Walmart or Target or Harris Teeter or Giant Food, they love customers. I mean, customers are not a burden. So really what we need to be doing is focusing on getting those areas privatized so they don't complain about too many customers, throwing the state out of school, throwing the state out of state hospitals and so forth, and put them under private ownership. Then you've got businesses that are saying, hey, more customers, the better. So there's my opening salvo, Richard, on what I think is the biggest objection that statists have to the concept of open borders. What do you think about this issue?
Well, I think that if the people who make that case are serious, and if they're willing to be logical and consistent, they would have to say that there needs to be border controls among the 50 states. Because surely there are states, we know this to be the case, that are far more generous in their welfare and related programs for those who reside in their state. And there are other states in which the welfare payments and benefits are lower. Now, does that mean that there is people who move from low welfare states to high benefit welfare states? And wouldn't that be then a burden on the taxpayers of the state with the higher welfare benefits? And how do you prevent that? Well, obviously, you have to have border control, and you have to screen and interrogate those who want to enter your state. Why are you coming into state X in the United States from state Y? Are you planning to be on welfare? Have you lined up a job yet? Do you have relatives who already live in this state who will assure that they'll financially support you until you get a job? Oh, wait a minute. You want a job? Well, you might be competing against the residents of this state already. You mean you want to steal their job? We have to now have state level employment central planning. Well, how many people do we need to come out in? And for what occupations, professions, or types of work? And, even state borders within the United States could be porous. Someone might sneak in without having gone through these checks. So we now have to have our own investigative branches of the state police. They have to investigate. They have to surveillance. They have to do raids on residences and businesses. You have to show your papers, your documents. Do you have a right to be in this state? Do you have a residency permit? Do you have a work permit? Oh, you don't. You came to state A from state Y under illegal circumstances. We have to take you into custody, throw you into a detention center, and then deport you to the state from which you came. Now, if I were to say this seriously, most Americans would consider that I'm crazy. But the answer is, why is that any more crazy than if people want to come from Mexico? I like to sometimes point out that when the United States had a war with Mexico in the 1840s, the upshot of that war is that we obviously won it. We annexed the northern third of Mexico. But there were people at that time who wanted to annex all of Mexico. Let's suppose they had succeeded. And so all of Mexico had been made part of the United States. So what are the different states in Mexico today would just be among the states of the United States. So now a person wanted to come to Iowa or Montana or New York or Oregon or Illinois from Sonora or Baja California or the Yucatan. Well, we would just say that's fine because you're just an American moving to a different state. Well, why would that be okay if we had conquered and annexed all of Mexico, but Mexico just happens to be a different political regime and country south of the Rio Grande? But if those same people, those same individual human beings wanted to cross the Rio Grande for nothing else than peaceful decisions to live, to work, to retire, to visit, to associate with friends and family, that has to be stopped. You have to have permission. You have to explain how long you're going to be here and why. And if we decide that you're not eligible, if you attempt to sneak in, well, there are going to be bad consequences for you. Why should we do that? Any more than the logic of why state governments within the United States should have similar immigration controls. My God, someone might want to come from Arizona and steal Jacob Hornberger's job. He might offer to be president of FFF for a lower salary. And my gosh, he might be underbid. Well, we can't allow Jacob Hornberger's job to be threatened by an illegal alien from Arizona. We have to have border controls. Well, that sounds ridiculous, but that's the logic of it. Uh, the classical liberal, the libertarian ideal is that people should be allowed to freely trade, associate, and move. The fundamental principle of liberty is that the individual has an ownership of the most precious piece of property imaginable, himself. You should not be
All right.
attacked, violated, abused, but you cannot live as a free person without the ability to have the capacity to not maintain your life, to improve your life, to associate with others as you think that it's beneficial and desirable. And that means doing so where you wish. As long as you do not kill, steal, or defraud, then the state should leave you alone, whether you're a citizen of Mexico or the United States or any other country on the planet. And if America were to follow that example, people would just freely come here. Now, on the general welfare thing, let me reiterate the point that Jacob was making. You know, two wrongs don't make a right. We already have a terrible situation where the state, well, basically those who are the power positioners in the state, presume the arrogance, the hubris, to assume that they know better for us than we ourselves. They plan, they control, they regulate, they determine. Among these are Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, which they extract our wealth from us, either through direct taxes or borrowed money, which adds to the debt, and proceed to determine what our retirement will be, our medical benefits will be. The classical liberal libertarian considers that this is wrong, not only because of the economic inefficiencies, but as Jacob was fundamentally getting at, the right of the individual to have control over his own life, to make his own decisions about all such matters and every others, and to be able to keep the fruits of his labor that he's honestly earned. And therefore, that's the logical premise of why there should be no welfare state, no compulsory redistribution of wealth. You notice I've said compulsory. Private charity, private philanthropy, all those are matters of free choice, which always tend to blossom in free societies. But if the redistributive state is itself wrong, why do you exacerbate it? Why do you put a layer of compulsion and force and threat and power onto that by then having these immigration controls? The heart is you should eliminate all such controls. Rather than restrict immigration, start doing everything in your power to eliminate the welfare state. Make your society freer, not more controlled by adding one layer of control onto one that is already there and shouldn't be, and then is causing the concerns that has led you to doubt the right of freedom to move.
Okay. You raised another objection indirectly, so let's address it. That immigrants come in and they take jobs from Americans or their lower wage rates. Well, the way I look at it, Richard, is nobody's got a right to any particular job, including me. If somebody can outcompete me for this job, he has a right to try to do so. And it applies to everybody. I mean, when we talk about the term free enterprise, it means enterprise that's free of government control. And that means that somebody may come and offer to work at your job for a lower amount of pay. You don't have a right to say, stop that person, whether he's somebody who lives two doors down from you or lives in the next town or the next state. You don't have a right to a particular job. But what ends up happening inevitably is the immigrant comes in and displaces workers in certain areas, let's say like harvesting crops. And so, yeah, that looks like something really bad for the American that's over there that's been harvesting these crops because these people are working for less. Man, that guy's been put out of a job. But what happens is the immigrant is going out and having to buy used cars, clothing, other items at the groceries. And all of a sudden, those businesses realize demand is increasing and they put out that help wanted sign. And who answers that help wanted sign? The high school graduates that before were picking the crops, the Americans that they're better qualified for these jobs and they're higher paying jobs. So what looks to be like something bad actually turns out to be something good in terms of a higher paying jobs for those who are displaced at the bottom.
Yeah, let me elaborate on a few things about that also. It is true that a good number of those who come to the United States are often low skilled or no skilled. But the fact is that in the system of division of labor, they fill niches that many Americans in our wealthy society are reluctant to do. I don't want to do that kind of work. I'm more qualified, I'm more educated than to take that kind of job. Or, I have my opportunity costs. Given my education, I can get this pay. Why would I take that low pay? And so how do those lower skilled and lower paying jobs, because the work that can be done is less valuable to the potential employer, to be done? Well, if you look at the historical record of our country, you've had waves of immigration, first from this part of Europe, that part of Europe, this part of Asia, that part of Asia, so on and so forth. And quite often, a large influx of people from these different areas in their own wave of these migrations are uneducated, poor, low skilled. And what do? They fill the lower niches that others don't want to perform. Where do you find many of these immigrants in our society today? Home construction. Who's building the houses? Like, I'm living in a house that's only 6 years old. And my wife and I watched this house being built in this new subdivision. And in fact, virtually none of the construction workers spoke English. Now, they didn't all come from Mexico, other parts of Latin America, Central America. But the fact is that that's who was doing this backbreaking hard work out in the elements in the summer, in the heat. Who does the landscaping, the gardening? Who often serves as the nannies or the domestics help in houses? Who cleans up the offices at night? Okay. Or are the people cleaning the dishes in the back of a restaurant after the meals have been ordered? Often these immigrants, but they don't stay there. That's another historical lesson. Those who come here tend to move up. Now, do they achieve all of their dreams and hopes? No. But again, if you look at the patterns of immigration, their children, and certainly the grandchildren, have had this chance in America that their parent or grandparent provided by coming here, and their life is much better. They're more skilled, they're more educated, they become middle class. All that results in, and then, well, who does the jobs then that their parents or grandparents did when they first came to America? Well, then again, the historical pattern is that there's another wave of immigrants. They may come from the same parts of the world or different parts of the world. And then they have their first niches in the system of division of labor, in people mutually serving each other through supply and demand and employments and hiring at the bottom rung. And the process repeats itself again. This is not an illusion. It's not just a dream. This is just the history of America. We are a land of immigrants. And we've had waves of people from different parts of, first to different parts of Europe, then different parts of Latin America, different parts of Asia. And for one reason or another, they came here and they went through the same patterns. I can assure you that I'm not a spring chicken anymore. I'm not a dead duck, but I'm not a spring chicken anymore. And I'm, by golly, old enough to remember when I was a little kid growing up in New York City. And there would be the little kiosks in the subway stations or the little delis on the streets. Who ran these? Who are the employees? Different people in terms of language, ethnic background, previous native nationality. But they're not the same people doing it today because the waves go on and the process continues in the same way. It's just different faces as new immigrants arrive. So this fear of a loss of jobs, and first of all, you never know who's going to make it. I believe practically every viewer or listener has heard of Elon Musk. He's what? He's labeled as the wealthiest man in the world because that's what they constantly call him. He came to Canada when he was 17 years old with barely $1,000 or $2,000 in his pocket. He went to college eventually, and he had a huge loan debt. Why would you think this guy would ever make it any more than the average Joe? But he had the freedom to leave South Africa and first go to Canada and then the United States and proceed to apply his acumen, his creativity, his innovativeness, his entrepreneurial touch, reading the market, imagining, figuring out ways to do. And he has improved multitudes of lives, multitudes of lives. Let me give one example. Now, I don't know whether this is going to be fulfilled or not, but you go to YouTube and it's from his companies. He's now selling, he's going to go into the house business. He's going to make small mini houses that is sort of like for a single person or a couple who are really willing to downsize. Do you know what this house is going to cost? At least according to his company's advertisement. They're not building these houses yet. It's like a projection, okay? $6,000. Imagine if that's true. And now homes for a single person or a couple that really don't need or want a lot of space for $6,000, that will revolutionize living for millions of people in the United States. Not everyone wants a small house like that he says he can design with his new technology materials, like what he built spaceships with. But who could have imagined that that person would have that dream that might be implemented the same way his spaceships and his electric cars? When he came to North America as a 17-year-old with just a couple of $1,000s in his pocket. You never know who will be the brilliant individual who has the dream that he is working hard to bring to fruition that benefits all of us. But he might not have come if the regulations had been more restrict or he had been dissuaded from even trying because he wondered whether he'd be allowed to go there. You never know. That's the importance of freedom to move, because you never know what person, given a greater opportunity in a more open society, will do things that will amaze the world.
All right. Well, that's great for Elon Musk, Richard. But with open borders, what if the whole world came to the United States? I mean, how would we handle the entire world? That's
Well,
another
first of all,
common objection.
my house price would rise dramatically for me. So I'm going to make a killing. And since Kamala Harris is not going to be president, she's not going to tax my unrealized gains. So I could just live here and then enjoy it when I cash out. Now, I understand what you're saying. Um, the fact is that America was open in the 19th century and in the first part of the 20th century. And millions of people came here when America was a smaller country in terms of population, so that the waves of immigrants represented a larger percentage of the US population. In fact, if I can give an example, when they did the census, they do the population census every 10 years. When they did the census in the year 1900, right, the beginning of the 20th century, the US population was less than 100,000 people. Excuse me, 100 million people. Uh, it was about, well, less than 100 million people. And what was then estimated from the census is that one-third of that population, one-third of that population were either immigrants or the children of immigrants. One out of every three? Could the country absorb all that? Of course. Could the country absorb tens of millions of more? Now, again, I don't know how many viewers and listeners have had a chance to travel across the United States, but particularly once you're west to the Mississippi, it's empty. It's empty. There ain't nothing there. Now, new cities, new communities, new industrial locations. They say, oh, how could that happen? Hello? Where do you think Chicago began? Where do you think St. Louis began? Where do you think any American city began? It was just wilderness. It was just more of nothing out there. And populations came. Waves of immigrants came, making new towns, new cities, new farms, new industrial sites, new manufacturing locations. America could absorb far more, far more. Uh, and we would all be benefiting from it. And just one other point, and you had suggested this earlier in your comment, Jacob. You know, if you, it takes a particular type of person to become a migrant. You're giving up your home country, your language, your culture, the customs, the traditions, the relatives, the neighbors, the sense of roots and a belonging, and just the surroundings that you grew up in, and sort of help make you feel who you are and what you feel comfortable with. It it involves a lot to give all of that up. Talk to any immigrant who's ever come here. You know, randomly, if you get into a conversation with someone who themselves have come to the United States as an immigrant, and ask them, was it easy to do all this? Now, there's always going to be someone who says, yeah, I hated it there. But most people do not give up all of that easily. Historically, people have suffered from religious persecution. They've suffered from political oppression. They've suffered from lack of economic opportunity because of the corruption, the controls, the restrictions that their own governments place upon them that narrow the corridors of having any material chance in life. And therefore, with their own concern and dreams that they'll have a family someday, and they would want their children to do better than they've been able to do in their parents' eyes in the old country, they make that break. You settle into America, you have to learn the language. You have to sort of fit in the culture, the traditions, and the customs. Learn the new street smarts, if you will. Make new friendships, learn new skills, learn the new rules of etiquette and behavior and interaction. It's not easy to do that. Would the whole world want to come here? No. I've traveled to other countries in different parts of the world, different countries in Latin America. I've been to the Middle East. I've been to Asia. I've been to many countries in Europe. And there are people who admire America, who love the music and the culture and the food and the movies and all the other stuff. But if you ask them, have you ever thought of moving to America? Of course, some have. But of course, talk is cheap. Some have, a lot don't. They like it being in France or Germany or in Malaysia or in Guatemala, for example, or Argentina. I'm naming some of the countries I've been to. They wouldn't even think of it. Could there be circumstances in which they might? Yes, of course. Persecution, oppression, such severe limits on economic opportunity that they feel like they have no choice but to economically breathe freer somewhere else. But in general, most people don't want to leave their country, their families, their friends, their language, their culture, their sense of who they are. So the fear that the entire world would come here is just absurd. And the country is so large and has so much physical space opportunity to have so many more centers of industry and commerce and trade and culture that I don't think that that should be one of the last things we worry about.
Yeah, there's or I forget what the statistic he used, Walter Williams, but I think it was something like the entire population of the United States could fit in the empty parts of Texas or something like
Yeah,
that.
something like that.
But speaking of Texas, there's been waves of people, as we all know, for the last 10 years that have gone from California to Austin. Now, I lived 3 years in Austin. I can attest that it is the best city in the United States. And if there were immigration controls between the states, like you suggested earlier, and you and I were advocating a dismantling of those, people would say, oh, no, if you did that, everybody from California would move to Austin. Well, okay, a lot of people have, but there's people that like California. Even though Austin is clearly a better place than any place in California, there's a lot of people that say, no, we like it in California. Um, there's other cities that are nice. New York City is popular. Now, Richard, you can't deny that it's possible that tomorrow the entire population of the United States could suddenly decide to move to New York City because it's so nice. So, should we enact an immigration control around New York State, to prevent this possibility? You can't deny it's possible that the entire world, at least the world here in the United States, could move to New York City. Well, it's easy to come up with these catastrophic thoughts. As you point out, most people like where they live. I remember talking to a Mexican guy in San Miguel de Allende, and he had been here twice as an illegal immigrant. And I said, "Why'd you come back?" And he says, "Because I love Mexico. I mean, the United States, I can make more money, but I love living here." So it applies to everybody. The reason that people have these catastrophic thoughts is because you have this big backlog at the border because of central planning. And they see this backlog and they say, oh my gosh, look at the backlog. That means the whole world wants to come here. No, it means that the central planner has not calculated correctly in how many immigrants should be coming in. And finally, there's the laws of supply and demand. As you pointed out earlier, your house would soar in value. That means less people are going to move there as things get more expensive. And the same thing applies to an entire country. As things get more expensive, people say, we're looking elsewhere. And that's what's happened in Austin. A lot of people don't move to Austin anymore because everything's so expensive. Same thing with Florida. People stop in Georgia now that are immigrating from New York or Connecticut. Um, so, Richard, the last one I want to finish by 7:45 if possible. The last one is culture, that they're going to destroy our culture. Well, the way I look at it is that what culture? I mean, we've got so many cultures in America. Chinatown and San Francisco, Little Italy and New York, the French Quarter, my hometown of Laredo, Texas. I'd say about 20% of the population does not speak or write English. The street signs are are named after Spanish and Mexican heroes. The store signs are both in English and Spanish. The daily conversations, I would say about half of them are in Spanish. That is not the culture that I think the statists want to preserve. That's the culture that drives them nuts. But our culture has always been one of freedom, where you have these enclaves, you have the Amish. Okay, they live differently. Who cares? This is a country where you come and you live your life the way you want, as long as you don't go and murder or defraud people. And that's the type of culture we need to preserve. And the only way to preserve that culture is with a philosophy and a system of freedom, which is necessarily open borders.
Well, I'll say it's not just people may want to preserve parts of their culture after they come here in little clusters and communities. The fact is that America has often been called the melting pot. And one of that is because what is American culture? Now, if you could go back to the 1820s or 1830s, you would find that most Americans, the vast majority of them, were descendants of the people from the British Isles. So what would American culture have been? Well, you'd say uh, an offshoot of British culture. attitudes, manners, uh, cultural beliefs. Fast forward to 1870 or 1880. Now, it is true that many of those earlier generations that had come to America didn't like, they resisted, they resented, they were afraid. All these Germans are coming, all these Italians are coming, all these Poles are coming, on and on. Scandinavians are coming. And guess what? They're going to dilute the culture. They're going to make America different. No, all these different other cultures and traditions and customs, whether it be manners or food or others, became mixed. So that then when you ask the question, what is American culture, American society in the 1880s and 1890s, it was no longer that original British cultural background. It was now this mix and blend of all these others. And then if you ask the question today, what is American culture? It's not the same thing as in 1880 or 1890 because of other waves of immigration and just cultural changes within the society itself. We have absorbed other societies' cultures, traditions, customs, from manners and mannerisms to the food we eat and the music we like to listen to. So that the American culture is an amalgam of what people come to view as the most desirable and attractive and enjoyable from multitudes of cultures, mostly shared and learned from and integrated with everything else by immigrants. Now, if we could go into a fast forward time machine and look back at America, let's say 100 or 150 years from now, to the America today, America will be a lot different then. The same way the America today is a lot different than the America of the 1820s or the 1830s. Partly will be, I presume, waves of more immigrants if some political figures don't try to literally shut the door. Uh, and then there will be all the internal changes. And then what will it mean to be an American in terms of culture 150 years from now? All of the changes and transformations in people's attitudes, beliefs, actions, desires, hopes, learned and modified ways of associating and interacting, and all the things that will have become amalgamated into that early American culture by all the waves of immigrants that will still then be coming over the next 150 years. And that will just make a different America, but not necessarily a worse America or a bad America. It will just be the America of adding so much more of the world to the American experience. And in that sense, America becomes truly the most cosmopolitan society on this planet because we absorb and integrate and bring together all that the world has to offer, as opposed to leaving each one isolated in its own geographical area on some other place of the planet.
Okay, let's go to Q&A. If you want to ask a question, please go to the Q&A section. And so somebody writes, Richard, don't we need to moderate the influx of people, of immigrants, to ensure infrastructure can keep up? Example, hospitals, especially with the regulations that make it difficult for new facilities to be launched. Well, the word moderate means government control. And I reject that notion because once you say moderate, you're saying, well, government has a role here to control this and decide how many are necessary and so forth. This is your central planning model. The central planner can never know what the right number is. It's what Ludwig von Mises called planned chaos. I mean, what greater term to describe the border, the U.S.-Mexico border? For the last at least 80 years, our entire lives, we've had planned chaos. Don't go down that road of saying, well, they've got statist programs over here. They have state hospitals, state-owned hospitals or government-owned hospitals or state public schools, and therefore we need to accommodate our beliefs and our philosophy to their statist system. No. Maintain the freedom position and make them adjust. In other words, privatize hospitals, privatize the educational system. You got an easy solution there. That's the libertarian solution anyway. Get government out of healthcare, get government out of education. So if our system of open borders, which is the freedom system, pushes them to move in a freedom direction, that's great. That's fantastic. But never should we be manipulated or maneuvered because of their statism into joining them on statism on any particular ground, including immigration.
Well, let me sort of deal with that from a slightly different angle. My wife and I live in an area called Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. As you introduced me, I'm a professor of economics at the Citadel in Charleston. And Mount Pleasant is a township just to the east, across a river from Charleston. Now, we've been here for about 10 years, a little over 10 years. When we moved here, and I'm not going to get the number right, but let's just say the population of Mount Pleasant was X. Just in the last 10 years, that population has grown by approximately 50%. That's huge. That's huge. When we came here, were there stores, were there shops, were there restaurants? Yes. But they were a lot fewer, um, less variety, less specialized stores and boutiques, so that we would have to go across the river to Charleston itself for many other things, more density, larger population, more diversity in the market. Well, in the last 10 years, with this huge increase in population, what's happened? Well, people want to live someplace. There's been a housing boom. Single family, townhouses, semi-detached, rental facilities, etc. But a rising population has created a motive, an incentive, a profit opportunity for an equal explosion of shops, stores, restaurants, markets, boutiques, so that now we don't have to go across the river to enjoy some of the best German food, Italian food, Mexican or Spanish food, et cetera, et cetera. And every imaginable food grocery store is here. The market discovered that where people are, there are profit opportunities. Now, this issue of what about the infrastructure? Well, hospitals, for example, as Jacob was alluding to, unfortunately, too much of the medical sectors of the economy are either controlled by the government or highly influenced with subsidies and regulations. So whereas if it's discovered that with a growing population, there are the profit opportunities for a more granulated variety and numbers of restaurants and shopping centers and different markets of clothes and electronics and so on and so on. Why would there not be the same thing as, oh, more people? Well, people sometimes have medical problems. Maybe if we should build another hospital, attract specialists and physicians and lab technicians here by offering them attractive wages, because with the growing population, there'll be the market demand for medical services because people sometimes are ill and they need that specialized service. You can go on and on and on. It's the failure of allowing the market to work and respond to the patterns and the places of demand that create these infrastructure problems. It's the state restricting, controlling, or determining them. That's the problem, and often limiting them for various political reasons, rather than allowing the market to respond to where people are and satisfying what they want. And that applies to infrastructure as well.
Well, and yeah, and the argument really is an argument for population control, because what's the difference between people having children and adding to the population in that area as compared to immigrants coming in? So if that's really somebody's concern, too many people, well, it seems to me that's also an argument for population control and mandatory birth control. Well, I don't buy it. It's like you've pointed out, Richard. A lot of times, increases in population add to the prosperity and the overall standard of living. I mean, you saw this during the Industrial Revolution. People were going to the cities and increasing their standard of living. The more people that were moving into the cities, as crowded as they were, and as overpopulated as they seem to be, like New York City, Manhattan, their standard of living was rising. It was quite phenomenal. Okay, here's a comment. Somebody quotes me that the dole weakens people. Yeah. Okay, she says Jeffrey Tucker actually wrote a great article on that with a similar headline for the Epoch Times, How Free Money Corrupts the Soul. And she got a link there. I'm trying to understand this point, Richard. Maybe you can understand it better, somewhat academic. Counter Markets wrote a great piece on how the people, we are us, being the three most dangerous and de-individuating words in language, should stop being anthropomorphized, sorry, as a single being for an entitled individual to use as a crutch placeholder in place of their self. I don't know what that means. Do you?
I may be all wrong off completely, but I think that what is alluded to is that the state dehumanizes us. What does it mean to be a human being? Well, I know that's been the question since the beginning of, since Plato and Aristotle. But a human being is someone who has a consciousness, a will, the capacity to imagine and dream, to act and create, to weigh things that he's faced with and good, positive and negative costs and benefits and so on, and and thrive. But when the individual is either controlled or subtly controlled by the state giving him things that he otherwise would have to show a maturity and a responsibility to decide upon and provide for himself, it infantilizes all of us. We are the permanent children with a governmental parent, that political paternalism, and that just undermines what a human being should be. Now, maybe I've misunderstood the question totally off, and for that participant who submitted it, I apologize, but that was the meaning I took out of it.
Okay. Uh, Comment, one can regulate or moderate in the private sector with private hospitals. One can discriminate as they please on private property. Well, that's true. Um, all right. There's a question here. What are American Indians' role? I'm sure they're relating Native American Indians' role in debating current immigration policy. I'm not really sure what they mean by that.
Um, well, okay. Again, the question is kind of vague and ambiguous, and I apologize again to the person who wrote it because I'm just trying to get a handle on what you're asking. Technically, the United States made treaties with Indian tribes. And while they are within the United States in the broad administrative sense, they administer their own Indian tribal territories. So I suppose that one thing is, could tribal, could the Indians on these reservations, which are supposed to be sort of their territories, uh, prohibit immigration into them? Well, I guess that would be a sovereign state question. I would argue that it would be in the best interest for the Native Americans in that situation to be open. It can't get worse than what they've had under the government mandated and managed reservation system. That's socialism in action and infantilization in action. But as far as the issue of the general immigration issue, I don't see how they would have a legitimate objection or prohibition on immigration into the United States any more than any other individual or group from a freedom point of view. Um, I don't know how to read the question more than that. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, we're about out of time, so let's wrap things up. I want to thank everybody for participating in this series and for your great support of FFF. Uh, this obviously is, I think, the burning issue, or at least one of the top three burning issues of our time, and it's not going to go away. And this immigration morass has been with us all of our lives, and there's this notion, this mindset that this system can be made to work, and it's a mindset that has existed every year that FF has been in existence. I mean, every single year I say the system cannot work. It will not work. It won't work tomorrow. It won't work the coming year. but the mindset is, oh, Jacob, you're wrong. And at the end of the year, people say, okay, Jacob, you were right. But next year it'll work. It'll work. And there's always this sense that this socialist system can work. It will never work. It will never work. Socialism is an inherently defective paradigm. And so, why do we do what we do here? Well, to provide people with at least the idea that there's a way out of this. There's a way out of this morass. We don't have to live under this constant immigration crisis. I've seen this crisis all my life, continuously. Since I was a kid, I grew up on a farm on the Rio Grande. It has never gone away. It will never go away. There's only one way out of this morass, and that's freedom and free markets and limited government, which means open borders, the free movements of goods, services, and people across borders. And I've said this over and over again. I've been like beating your head up against the wall. There is only one solution, not multiple solutions. There's only one solution to this morass and the police state that came with it, and that's open borders. And so I hope we've addressed everybody's major concerns about open borders in this last series, and I hope you've enjoyed this series and that you found it important and constructive in understanding and helping you to impart to other people the importance of open borders. Richard, any closing comment?
Yeah, I would just ask the viewers and listeners to ask themselves in their own minds, suppose that the borders had been closed into the United States when their ancestors wanted to come, so that your grandparents or great-grandparents or whoever it was that you're the descendant of had wanted to come to America and had the door closed in their face. Where would you be today? What would your life opportunities be today? Would you even be alive today, given the wars and the tragedies and the famines in other parts of the world? If the border had not been open in the past, that had enabled your ancestors to come here so you could have the life in America that today you take for granted. Why shouldn't everyone have that possibility? It's called, wait a minute, the word is on the tip of my tongue, freedom.
On that note, we'll wrap things up. Thank you all again, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next conference.